Like, talking about me. All right, we're live. All right, here we go. Hey, Alex Williams with the New SAG here for another session. I think this is the time of the day where it's after lunch and before dinner, and so we're all kind of in that moment. I am at least.
Goofy and giddy.
Getting a little punchy.
Yeah, it's getting a little punchy. So so we're talking about SIGs, right? And and I just want to set a baseline for this conversation. What are the role of SIGs in Kubernetes? Because SIGs are something that you see in all kinds of open source organizations and organizations overall. But what is the tone, the themes you're trying to set with the SIGs, in the Kubernetes ecosystem?
So special interest groups, SIGs, are used as a governance and
scaling mechanism.
Yeah. Really, scaling is a good description because they own code, they own areas of the project, they own areas of the code base, they own sub-projects, adjacent projects, they have some technical ownership, they have some vision ownership, but basically as Kubernetes has gotten bigger and as the project has gotten immensely popular and more people want to contribute, in order to keep us from falling into a monolithic and then hierarchical organizational structure, monolithic code base and a hierarchical coding structure, we need to distribute our decision making. And so the special interest groups are how we do that.
I don't think we planned any of that, though.
It was very organic.
As it turns out, I may have thought a bit of this through. A bit, yes. It was not something that I was as forthright about because
you were pulling the strings.
I was pulling the strings from behind because I had spent a lot of time writing. It's true. Writing. I had spent a lot of time writing and thinking about Conway's Law, and we really needed to not have. If we were going to build a distributed compute platform to distribute and orchestrate containers, we couldn't have a hierarchical structure building it.
So Conway's Law.
It's so Conway's Law.
So why is it Conway's Law?
We'll define that for the listeners.
For the listeners. Okay.
They've already looked it up on Wikipedia.
Yeah. Right. So Conway's Law actually talks about how the software that you build reflects the organizational structure that you have.
Right.
And you can also do it the other way. So they influence one another. Let's just be open about the fact that one can push the code structure can push the organizational structure can push the code structure.
Right.
And as we were building this and trying to scale it, I had been speaking about microservices for 2014 and 15 a bunch. And microservices, in order to do this, we needed a distributed mechanism for actually making decisions, just in the same way that we needed this, that microservices allowed us to do this.
A systems example for Conway's Law is organizations often have a mem copy between the organization's code bases. So, you can see that there's often inefficiencies between orgs that you hopefully want to erase. And the way the SIGs are so flat, it actually works out pretty well, as does the container nature of encapsulating a lot of the code focuses.
Joe, what do you think?
So, the first SIG was SIG Scale. This was back when Kubernetes was really young. And we were getting beat up a lot because the original decisions around Kubernetes were, let's get the abstractions right, let's get the patterns right, and then we can always optimize and scale up, right? So I think the first release of Kubernetes were like, we can handle 100 nodes. And everybody's like, well, we can handle 500 nodes, and so Kubernetes sucks then. And we're like, all right, we should probably deal with that. And so we got a bunch of folks.
I remember that.
Yeah, and so and we have this Thursday meeting every week. It's a community meeting, and we started that really early, really early, and it got to the point where that topic was too deep and there was too much to track to actually do it in that one community. So it's like, let's break off a group of people and start concentrating that, and that became SIG Scale. There wasn't a lot of discussion. It kind of happened by accident, and it kind of grew from there. I think maybe Sarah had a larger plan than she ever let on with that, so that's good to hear.
This is leadership through influence, and I do it quietly.
you carry a big stick.
No, but you would never know it.
I know, right? But and I think the interesting thing is that with the steering committee, as the project gets bigger and the stakes get higher, frankly, I think we're getting more formal about how we think about SIGs, and it's an evolving process. And I think that's something that we're going to see over the coming months, is that we're going to have probably more thinking about how do we create SIGs, what's the right size, how do we pick SIG leads, which is more of a cooperative thing right now. Those are things that I think are going to be evolving over the coming months.
They're really Byzantine. I mean, the goal is not to make them all uniform or feel like cookie cutters. And
it's a lot of United States of Kubernetes. United States of Kubernetes.
A lot of it has to do with the fact that
USK.
Yeah, very much. The people who are really interested in scheduling internals are going to have a very different feel than the people who are doing auth.
Yeah.
And so it's not just the technical problems that drive it, it's also the cultural the people are interested in those problems. And you'll see the way they organize, let's say, their milestones or the goals that they're trying to make. Some people really love process. Other people are a bit more seat of the pants. And there's room in each SIG to do this appropriately, which is what's really nice.
So, you mentioned we were talking about Conway's Law, and the code will reflect the organization, or the organization will reflect the code. Mm-hmm. With Kubernetes, what is it? Both.
They are influenced by each other.
Okay.
And as we are working, Joe mentioned the steering committee looking at SIGs. So SIGs early on, and as the group was much smaller, most of the SIGs were led by people that I refer to as hand raisers. Someone that says, yep, I'd be happy to be a lead.
Right.
I'll take care of this. I'll do the scheduling. I'll get the right people in the room. We'll have a conversation. And that they brought different skills depending on their interests, depending on their capabilities. Some of them were more technical. Some of them were more project or process oriented. And some of them just were interested in an interesting topic like scaling. And so as the project has grown, and the number of people involved has grown, the ability to have trust and comfort and know those skill sets and make sure that the right people are supported in the right ways has been harder. So as we're growing, we want to set a few more bounds on what it means and how those people work and what is expected. Cleaner interfaces.
Yes.
I love it.
What does that mean?
Well, like, whenever you break up code into different pieces, you want to make sure you have clean, well-defined interfaces.
Strong contracts.
Strong contracts.
It's
code contracts.
Setting expectations.
Yeah.
Like any relationship, whether it's people or code, both parties need to understand what they're expecting from the others.
Yeah.
And what's nice about doing this with interfaces is that if you do them right, it's obvious. You don't even have to talk to people.
Yep.
And so we spend a lot of time in Kubernetes trying to go over the interfaces as opposed to even implementation.
Programmers optimize not having to talk to people.
That's true.
It is. But
go ahead.
I was going to say, as we make these interfaces cleaner and more obvious, then you get even more autonomy within those smaller groups, and then that higher trust happens again in the smaller group, and the trust across the larger group happens at those interfaces, because we know that there will be, say, notes coming out of every meeting, and they could be reviewed, and there's a way to offer feedback to this special interest group about a thing because they've put out their discussion in notes and they've asked for feedback, and you know that the decision will happen on date. Again, we talked earlier a little bit about implicit governance versus explicit governance, and making these clean interfaces and stronger contracts between the groups allows the groups to scale in a way as a collected, united SIGs of Kubernetes.
I call it Cirque du Soleil, where like you're basically watching all of these individual dancers moving together, and they've got to be coordinated, and it's hard to do that at this scale.
Yeah. Orchestration. It turns out our people process is following our technical process in this space.
So there's one thing I do want to bring up is that there's this idea of like the relationship between SIGs and the code and the systems underneath it, because as Kubernetes evolved, we didn't necessarily understand the shape of all the problems that we were going to be dealing with. And so there is not right now as strong a connection between this piece of code relates to this SIG. It turns out that right now, a lot of times it's like this piece of code relates to this person, and this person operates across 6 SIGs, right? And so one of the things to actually enable this is we're going to be working on creating a much stronger connection between code and SIGs and sub-projects and SIGs, so that if anybody wants to contribute, or if they have a problem with something, they can track it down and they can know, oh, hey, I can talk to this SIG, they meet every Thursday, let me go ahead and actually start figuring out the right people, the right discussions, the right context for me to page in to be able to actually contribute here.
So like storage or accelerators, I mean, a lot of them actually cross things like they have to involve both the scheduling SIG and then they also have to involve the node SIG because the code bases straddle. And so often it doesn't always fit neatly into one category or the other, but because they're both present, they can coordinate and make progress.
Yeah.
Right.
We've also found in this evolving governance, evolving growth of this project, that some of the SIGs are very horizontal. They cover everything. So scaling is an example of that.
All stuff hits a lot of stuff.
All hits almost everything. And then others are very narrow and very specific and more vertical. And so we're finding that there are these different types of SIGs and how we engage with them are slightly different. This is a learning exercise. Like this, we don't have this solved, but we talked about core values earlier as well. Part of our core values is as a learning culture, we are always improving what we have.
Yeah. And it's fundamentally a human problem too, which is why
we're humans.
Well, no, but I mean, like, why, like, being able to have folks meet face to face and get to know each other and like, you know, joke around a little bit.
It's clubs. I mean, they turn into clubs to some degree.
Tree houses.
Yeah, the people are interested in the same sort of problems, and then they start congregating together.
Yeah.
And so it's helpful. I think the thing that gets funky is, and contentious at times, is where do the bugs go? So learning, you know, it's always easy to talk about where's the functionality, where are we going to write the code, and then when the release is coming out, poor Aaron Krickenberg, who has to basically take in this incoming stream of bugs and say, well, this one goes here and this one goes there, and figure that out. And what's nice about Kubernetes is people tend to jump on the grenade and jump on the problem and solve it, but it can be really hard to know who's got the expertise to solve certain problems, especially scalability. That's rough.
Yeah.
So it almost goes down. You know, it's interesting because now that speaks it down to the individual level in many ways.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and it speaks again to that culture that we are there to learn and to help and to grow the project as a whole, and that we do this as individuals, not necessarily as companies.
Yes.
And they arrange them differently. Some do rotations, and they're very, very sort of cooperative, and then some are more heroic, and they have like 1 or 2 TLs in the SIG who then take in these incoming issues and divvy them up appropriately because there's either a lot of history or trust from that view. And what I really like is it's kind of, it fits the group, as opposed to Kubernetes saying everyone must do it one way or the other.
Which speaks to the tribal nature of our groups as well. You talked about clubs and clubhouses, and each of the different SIGs has a different flavor, a little bit of a different culture, but there are overarching characteristics that fit all of Kubernetes.
So it seems like a challenge and a goal is to federate almost the SIGs in some manner, but keep them, you know, loosely coupled to some extent, you know, as independent entities.
Exactly.
That is exactly what we are working on how to do in a cohesive manner.
Things come together in SIG release and in SIG test, where these are areas where you have to have uniform behavior and reactions in order to make the system scale and behave in a predictable manner. And that's where it's kind of, you get all these odd shapes that come in one way and they all have to come out and behave uniformly. It's exciting to watch, and so far we've been able to make it work as a team.
How many SIGs are there now?
I'm going to say too many.
Somewhere right around 30.
Oh, wow.
And I think there's going to be a few more in Q1.
Okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
I think there's some proposals.
That proposal process sorted.
There's a formal proposal process. I think there's going to be 1 or 2 more proposals I'm aware of.
I think we're going to have to go through a rationalization process here too, so that number may fluctuate. Yeah.
This is a sign of an organization that's growing quite rapidly.
Right.
Growing rapidly, learning from everything we do, and trying to, you know, turn the corner from, you know, lots of innovation and evolution towards stabilization and enterprise adoption, with still putting more new features. Enterprisiness while still putting new features.
Again, it gets back to core values.
Yeah.
Right. And one approach that's nice is we have things called working groups. When you have something that spans more than one SIG, sometimes the working groups work. Sometimes they lead to a little bit more confusion, but like a good example is the resource management working group.
That was a great one.
Been around for a long time and deals with a lot of different hardware issues and how it spreads across several SIGs at once.
But working groups do not own code.
Do not own code.
And that's
They're
the important part with the
for
SIGs.
folks to get together and talk.
Yeah, like Derek Carr said it really well once. He says we should not be having a SIG if there's not a code base to administer and shepherd. maybe he didn't say it exactly in those words, but when he says it, it sounds great, and it's right.
Okay. So I just had a conversation with Brendan Burns and who else was there? Tim Hawken and Clint from Dell, from Code, the Code Group, and one of the things that they were talking about was the boundaries of Kubernetes continue to to expand, right? But what they're trying to say is we think we need to kind of like put some slow things down a little bit and start filling in the gaps filling in the gaps inside the Kubernetes kind of world, so to speak. So this has to reflect on the SIGs.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And SIG architecture is working on what is core Kubernetes. And what is that definition, and it's not even called core anymore. What is it called? The nucleus.
I don't know.
Nucleus.
We change it up.
There's a new word.
Okay, so the center, most important, what makes something Kubernetes. And then there's conformance around that, which we have announced the conformance testing and certification from the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. And then there are a whole lot of pieces that are associated and a whole lot of pieces that are tooling around Kubernetes, and we're trying, again, to rationalize and figure out which pieces need to be part of the project directly, which pieces should be near the project. We're looking at our incubation process right now as well, the steering committee is, in order to try to find what is the right balance of in versus adjacent. How do we keep a vibrant ecosystem happening while still moving toward an enterprise stable, consistent core?
So yeah. I mean, there's a real value on enabling the right extensibility points such that we can really boost a big ecosystem. And so we find where, I want to add X to Kubernetes, and we're like, that's great, let's add the right extension point, and once that extension point, now you can build it yourself, right? And that's not a satisfying answer for folks a lot, because they just want to get something done. But I mean, it's our job, as leaders in the project, to really take that longer term view of how do we enable stuff to actually grow in a responsible way instead of ending up with a hairball of a code base.
And there's another mundane dimension to the gaps also, which is that there's a lot of, like Tim calls it the 80-20% problem, where 80% of Kubernetes arguably has been put together. That 20%, that the hard part, the corner cases, the making, let's say, local storage a first-class citizen, there were reasons why it wasn't done yet. And now we're tackling them head on. And this leads to redefining a lot of the fundamental assumptions that we had made before, as we're really trying to figure out how to make the system complete. And that leads again to stability, which everyone agrees needs to be addressed, and each SIG is addressing it in different ways.
Well, and so I think, just to be clear, I think stability has different meanings to different folks, right? So there's stability as in the thing shouldn't crash. There's stability as in it does what I expect. And there's stability as in it doesn't change.
Right.
There's also stability in terms of the overall community.
The human orchestration, yes.
And there's also stability in the API expectations. So
exactly. That's why that doesn't change.
The Node group does a really good job. They've got 3 or 4 different validation frameworks, so that when you write your plugin, you've got assurances, like CRI is a good example, that your container runtime will work correctly in Kubernetes.
Well, you guys have a lot of work to do. What are some of the, some of the roadmap, matters that you're looking at just to get started in building out this kind of this core philosophy around the SIGs?
We have an entire list of what is called the steering committee backlog of topics for governance and special interest groups and how we want the project to run, which includes things like how do we break up the repo, make sure that SIG architecture gets the core pieces or the core definition done, what do we do about incubation,
how do we communicate the proposals process.
So
release notes.
We actually have the release notes process down fairly well.
Getting better.
It's getting better. So there is actually a GitHub page that has a backlog of all of the things we're working on around governance and special interest groups and leading the people.
What's really interesting thing is so much of this stuff is not going to impact users of Kubernetes, right? Yep. I mean, some of this is paying down sort of, organizational debt. Right?
Yes.
But this is important.
Oh, it's hugely important.
Because it, reflects just the health of the overall
what's really funny is this is a project, an open source project where like things like docs, people have a passion now. Even if you're not good at writing docs, every dev knows that the open source docs are just so vitally important.
They're so critical.
And like release management, you don't have to convince most Kubernetes engineers that these things are something they need to invest in, or that we need to support people to invest in them.
Great.
It's not just about the code, I think, at this point.
No.
It's very inclusive, which is cool.
This has been a real fun discussion. I've learned more about SIGs than I ever thought. That's what I consider a good interview. So thank you very much for taking the time, everyone. And
thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, and have a great show.
Thanks.
Thank you.